Joining us right now, Cully Stimson. He hangs out over there at a Heritage Foundation, writes at the Daily Signal. Great stuff over at Daily Signal about issues of military justice, and what a great day to have you because, well, yesterday the charges came through. Tell us exactly what Bo Bergdahl was charged with here, Cully Stimson, and which are the more I guess, severe charges, because desertion's one thing, but this whole aiding the enemy or misbehavior before the enemy, what does that mean?
Yeah, good morning, guys. Thanks for having me again. So he was charged with Article 85, desertion. There's several subsections under which he could have been charged, but he was charged with a section of desertion that could give him a maximum possible penalty of 5 years. The unique military charge he was charged with, however, is Article 99, misbehavior before the enemy. And he's charged in a subsection of that where he could get life. And the subsection he was charged under is subsection 2, where he is alleged to have shamefully abandoned or surrendered or delivered up his command. You don't see that kind of charge in the civilian world, but it basically means he not only dropped his pack, but that he, without justification, shamefully abandoned or surrendered or delivered up his unit, and it happened before in the presence of the enemy. And so that's what the court-martial, if it ever happens, is going to be about.
Hold on, Cully. This can't possibly be right, because I remember Susan Rice went on national TV on behalf of the Obama administration and said that he had served with honor and distinction. The things you described do not sound like honor and distinction to me, so where's the disconnect?
Do I hear a little sarcasm in here?
Yes, you hear a hell of a lot of sarcasm. That's
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's actually worse than that. I mean, this is a guy who, from what I've read, not only left his post on the day in question, but actually left his post 2 times prior to that, of course, came back. And so this is not a water walker, as we say in the military. This is not a 4-0 soldier. This is a guy who clearly had issues. What they were, we'll find out perhaps through his defense team. And I think the optics of the way the administration played this are completely bad. They clearly painted him to be something he's not. I mean, if we were going to bring him back, and I think it was right to bring him home at some point, you bring him back and you say, look, there's going to be a process to investigate why he left his post. There's going to be a process to hold him accountable if anything was wrong, and we're just going to leave it at that. But they didn't do that.
So,
and that's the problem.
Yeah. And so now yesterday, for the very first time, we actually got a statement from Bo Bergdahl since he's been released. It was through his civilian lawyers, and it was a huge document that was released. But in it was actually a passage that apparently was in Bo Bergdahl's own words. He talked about what happened while he was held captive, in his words, by the Taliban. He was in constant isolation, he says. He was told he was going to be executed. He was told he would have his ears and nose cut off. He was beaten with a thick rubber hose and with copper wire. Does any of that matter, given the fact that he handed himself over to them?
Well, what Gene Fidel, his civilian defense counsel, who's a friend and an outstanding attorney, is doing is trying to point out to people before there's a sentencing case, there's another side to the story here, guys, and you need to understand that my guy had these things happen to him. So this is all about pushing back against the narrative coming from the families whose loved ones were on search parties for him.
Yeah.
And this is about sentencing. This is a sentencing case, really. This is not an accountability case because I think he clearly left his post. The desertion charge, even though he's presumed innocent under the Constitution until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, this is about sort of laying the battlefield, if you would, for a sentencing case, because that's what this case is really going to boil down to.
We're all familiar, of course, mostly through television, not through personal experience, of what happens in the civilian courts. Talk to me about the process now in military court. These charges have come down. What happens next?
Yeah, so that's what happens next is, and the media gets this wrong, not you guys, but most of the other media gets it wrong. He goes to an Article 32, which is more like a preliminary hearing, not a grand jury. It's a preliminary hearing, essentially, where there's a military lawyer who acts as a quasi-judge. The prosecution puts on evidence to establish probable cause to believe that he committed these crimes. The defense is there with their defense attorney and defense team. They can cross-examine the government witnesses. And then that investigating officer, that quasi-judge, at the end of the proceedings, will make a written recommendation to the convening authority. Here, the general. The general will then decide, based on those recommendations, he can accept in part, whole, some, none, to refer the cases to the case to a general court-martial, which is a felony court-martial, refer the case directly to a special court-martial, do nothing, drop the charges, send them administratively to be processed from the military. So the convening authority has a lot of discretion here. The convening authority is a non-lawyer but advised by lawyers, by a senior JAG. So we don't know where this is going to turn out. My guess is that because they took so long to the investigation, because there's a thorough investigation, because of the nature of the charges, this will end up at a general court-martial. Now, whether there's a trial, I don't know, because Gene Fidel and his defense team are really savvy. They're really good. And I'm sure they're going to try to get a pretrial deal here, and I'm sure they're going to try to get some disposition short of a court-martial. So we don't know how it's going to play out.
All right. Then the other side of the equation was what had to be traded in order to get the release of Bo Bergdahl. 5 had been described as sort of Taliban generals. And last night on Megyn Kelly's program, she was talking to Jen Psaki over at the State Department. And the question Megyn asked is, was the trade worth getting Bo Bergdahl back? And this was what Jen Psaki had to say.
Was it worth it? Absolutely. We have a commitment to our men and women serving in our military, defending our national security every day, that we're going to do everything to bring them home if we can, and that's what we did in this case.
I understand the idea in the military about not leaving somebody behind. But was it really in the national security interest of the United States to trade these 5 really, really, really bad guys who, let's be honest, will eventually make their way back to the field of battle against the United States for Bo Bergdahl?
Yeah. This is a political decision made in the White House. Remember that the Taliban had asked for these 5 guys back years ago. And if you read Gates's book or Panetta's book, they both talk about it, and they said, no, it wasn't worth that high of a price, and that's what they recommended at the time. But ultimately, this was a political decision. Apparently, the administration had some information that Bergdahl's health or safety was declining or being compromised. And so they're suffering the political consequences of that deal. And, I said on another network this morning, I'm not convinced that we wouldn't have done a similar type of deal in the Bush administration, but I'm equally convinced, having been in the administration, that we would have pushed for a much harder bargain and not warehouse these guys for a mere year in essentially Fed Med over in Qatar, let them fly the coop after the year's up. You do bring your guys home, but I think we would have pushed for a much harder bargain.
Speaking of politics, really fast, Cully, Stimson, I try to compare military justice system to the civilian justice system. There is politics in the civilian system. There are elected officials like district attorneys and such who often put pressure on prosecutors and try to work this through for political purposes. What about the military system? Is there anyone that could put undue pressure on the judge or prosecutors in this case?
Well, unlike the civilian system where I've worked and there is politics, in the military system it's actually illegal to have unlawful command influence or unlawful political influence, and that can result in courts-martial getting thrown out. And so I think people are going to treat this with kid gloves, as they should. There's going to be a very antiseptic way of deciding how to go forward with this, regardless of what the White House wants. The Army's going to do the right thing, whatever that is. And so I'm very convinced, having worked in the system for 23 years, that this is going to be done the right way, and justice will be done, whatever that is.
Thank you, Cully Stimson.
Got to leave it right there. Thanks, Cully. Appreciate it.